History students, this is Mr. Kalin, and this video is going to be going over how to integrate quotations into your history papers. I'm going to go over both how to integrate primary source quotations and then secondary source quotations. Okay, the first thing I will absolutely want to show you is what not to do, which is do not incorporate or write a hanging quote, and that means you just list the quote from a source. So in this example, I have a quote from Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. You have the quote, "I have no purpose, directly or indirectly," finishes the quote, end quote, cites it with a period, but there's no introductory phrase. This kind of style is unacceptable in a history paper. Okay, what is acceptable, not ideal, but acceptable, is to say something like Abraham Lincoln said, then you have the quote, and then you have the source with the period right here. Okay, the reason why this is acceptable is unlike in this hanging quote, you do have this introductory phrase here that says Abraham Lincoln said. The best way to incorporate quotes in your history paper is to incorporate both the quote and your interpretation in exactly the same sentence. So here we have Abraham Lincoln's claim that he has, and then you have incorporation of the quote, illustrates his ambivalence about completely abolishing slavery. So you have interpretation and the quote in the same sentence to articulate your idea in your paper. This is by far the best way to do it. All right, let's look at secondary source quotations. The first thing I want to say is, as mentioned in class, you really should try and paraphrase secondary sources rather than usually directly quoting them. But if you're going to do it, I want to show you what not to do and what to do. So here, similar to the previous example, this would be an example of a hanging quote, which is just dropping a quote in here, citing it with a period. There's no introductory phrase. If we go to acceptable but not great, here we have Norton et al., which means many authors write that, quote, commercial specialization transforms some traders in big cities, especially New York, into virtual merchant princes, and then we have the page number there. Okay, that's acceptable. You have the introductory phrase here. The best way to do it here is Norton et al.'s argument that you have the quote helps explain the widening economic inequality in the late 19th century. So once again, the reason why this is better than the second one is you actually have some interpretation rather than just coming out and introducing the quote, citing the quote without any interpretation. So if you're looking for a few introductory phrases, these aren't the only ones you can do, but sometimes you can say, according to the author's quote, or the author argues that, and you could replace clearly the author with the exact author's name, author's state. Here, if you can't see that, I've used a colon. So notice here you have that. You don't need a colon. If you just do this, you would use a colon and then the quote. And then here would be ideal, you're starting to do interpretation. So when the authors state that, you got the quote, they suggest that citation works well. All right, to summarize a little bit, do's and don'ts. Okay, do incorporate quotation and interpretation in the same sentence. Choose intriguing quotations wisely and explain them fully. Do allow your explanation to go logically from your quotation. Cite the quote properly. And then don't let the sentence be overrun. You're much better off having smaller phrases with more interpretation than having a whole long line of quote without much interpretation at all. So that is how you incorporate both primary and secondary source quotations into your papers.